I'm Francesco. I work for ControlPlane, head of technical solutions. I'll introduce myself momentarily. In this session, what we're going to do, we will explore effectively the role of tabletop exercises. And for those of you not too familiar with what a TTX is, I will have a slide for that. And the idea is to understand how tabletop exercises can actually strengthen the cybersecurity posture of a regulated institution, like a regulated organization, like a financial services institution. The agenda, as I said, I'll introduce myself momentarily. We will be beginning by discussing what actually a TTX is. And in doing so, I apologize in advance to the more experienced security people in the room, because I will have to recap what security incident response is. And after that, what we're going to do, we will share some key lessons learned from a absolutely incredible tabletop exercise we organized with FINOS last year at the Open Source in Finance Forum, London. And after that, we will go through how to plan, how to structure, and how to successfully execute a tabletop exercise within your organization. And then we'll wrap up by explaining how you can get involved this year in the very exciting upcoming 2025 initiative in this space. As Carl mentioned, I like interactive sessions. Stop me anytime. I'm happy to take questions as we go. Fantastic. So real quick, who am I? Francesco, I wasted my youth in the data centers of the European government institutions. I was a security engineer, enjoying hardware very much back in the day. I then moved into Inmarsat, where my exposure to security operations began. I was initially chief security engineer for the satellite control center, so I was also exposed to regulated organization and infrastructure. I then took a keen interest in incident response. We bootstrapped a brand new security operations center. Initially, I led the security operations engineering team, which is the team in charge of the technical stack that enables security operations and incident response. And then I expanded my role, becoming head of security engineering for the company. So we also secured product and platform for the organization. And then in 2021, I did not want to see a network cable or a server in my entire life, and I joined ControlPlane. First role was a security engineering manager, looking after the security team and consultants. And then I more recently took over a new role, head of technical solutions, where I basically understand in cloud native what good is out there, and effectively how we can expand our business by investing and developing on it. Quick shout to ControlPlane, cloud native and open source consultancy and product company. We are headquartered in London. And by the way, being cloud native, that's why I made that comment about not wanting to see a data center again in my life. Established in 2017, headquartered in London, we operate globally. We really specialize in Kubernetes, anything that you can design and build on cloud, and open source in general. In fact, we recently put together an assured distribution of the popular CD tool Flux. We also focus on deeply threat modeled, secure by design and secure by default cloud native architecture. We specialize very well versed working with regulated industries, and we like to fill the gap between technical teams, security operations center, and the business of organizations. Very well, that part is out of the way. Let's deep dive into what an actual tabletop exercise is, why it's important, and as I said, we have to start from what security incident response is overall. So I'll start with basic definitions. This is 101 incident response. An incident is categorized and defined as an event that could lead to the loss of or disruption to an organization operations, data services, or function. Now, a security incident is an event that may indicate that an organization's systems or data have been compromised, or that measures put in place to protect them have failed. On the other hand, response is three things: people, process, and technology being used to identify, contain, eliminate, and recover from such events. Now, please bear in mind people, process, technology will keep coming back throughout the presentation. Let's talk about these three foundational pillars of incident response. Healthy security operations, and in particular incident response, are 100% built on these three pillars. I can't stress enough the importance of having people in your team and teams well organized with the right roles. Then you want to have well-established and documented processes as well rehearsed, which is the entire point of this conversation, about rehearsing your incident response processing. And as well, technologists, I have a deep passion for technology. You have to employ the right technology. It has to be, especially in the context of security operations, has to be sustainable, scalable, and your people, they have to know it inside out. Excellent. Now, to support organizing and coordinating your incident response capability, there are some frameworks out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. They are well tested, used by the largest organizations in the world, actually organizations of all sizes. So my advice is, again, don't reinvent the wheel. No matter what you choose, though, you need to choose something. You must have an incident response framework in place within your org if you care about minimizing the impact of threats against your business. If you have nothing in place, the advice is start small and then slowly mature your response capability. Is always a journey. However, it's worth mentioning that effectively traditional incident response, as outlined either on the NIST framework, on the SANS framework we have here in front of us, back in the day used to be very reactive, caused effectively security teams to always play the catch-up game against the threat actors and in general the bad guys. So at some point, organizations had to come up with something newer, more modern, which is called effectively intelligence-driven defense. Now, this is where we drop our 101 in incident response. We graduate, and organizations came up with something called, as I said, intelligence-driven defense. And in particular, we introduced more advanced capabilities. It was understood that effectively a reactive and event-based response was fundamentally insufficient against motivated, really motivated adversaries, and instead something more proactive had to be implemented. And in that sense, probably a word or two words you heard quite a bit in the space. Incident response must adopt something called kill chain. But what chain are we referring to? It was identified that broadly, the tactical steps that bad guys and threat actors perform to breach an organization and get to the crown jewels can be summarized as the 7 steps above: reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery of malicious payload, exploitation, installation, establishing persistent access, mind control, and then action on objectives. And the thing is, if we know that bad guys usually operate in this way, we can then come up with countermeasures to effectively break this chain. And therefore, hopefully, the only problem is that threat actors, they have thousands of ways of performing each step and associated tooling. And in fact, every organization, most organizations, they only have a finite number of resources to respond. So how do you deal with this? So all the permutations that threat actors can employ to breach your organization. There is excellent news is that we have tools out there. For instance, build something called the attack framework, which is effectively a taxonomy of tactics, techniques, and common knowledge that threat actors use to breach organizations. In particular, tactics are the adversary's tactical objective for performing an action, and the techniques instead represent the how an adversary achieves a tactical objective by performing an action. Now, this framework is completely open source and a goldmine of information to figure out how, most likely, a specific threat actor technically operates, and therefore how you can stop them, in theory, or at least trying to, and stopping them by implementing security countermeasures and adequate incident response. So, we know that threat actors are out there, they target us in a specific way using specific tactics and techniques, we can understand how we want to respond to these events, and again, trying to kill that chain. But response, by definition, is a finite number of steps to counterattack, to actually block a specific attack. And this finite number of steps must be documented. Where? Well, playbooks. Playbooks are high-level guides for responding to specific incidents. What's inside a playbook? As I said, finite number of steps, but in particular, playbooks outline key elements associated to an incident, such as identifying the type, such as outlining how decisions should be made and by whom, how to escalate depending on how the incident evolves, and why playbooks are absolutely essential. First of all, we don't always have time to think. Sometimes you just have to follow instructions when the fire is burning. But in particular, we need speed and consistency. So during an active incident, again, don't have much time to think. You want to automate as much as possible. Having playbooks really helps to ensure that the response is consistent across teams, because most times an attack impacts systems across the business, impact different teams across the business, and they really have to be on the same page to effectively respond. Also, playbooks are also a key part of meeting compliance standards like DORA, which require tested response processes. Now, we all understood playbooks are essential, or hopefully I passed the right message. Playbooks are essential and critical, but they must be regularly tested to ensure the actual playbooks, they work in real world scenarios. And that's where the tabletop exercise come in. Because if we had to define what a tabletop exercise is, effectively is a structured security simulation that fundamentally organizations can use to evaluate their response to a cyber incident in times of peace, let's say, not when an actual attack occurs. And I want to highlight that, unlike hands-on technical drills, the TTX has a strong business angle, is discussion-based, it's focused on decision-making very much, and communication. The primary purpose of a TTX is to effectively bring together, again, not when a crisis happens, but before, bring together key stakeholders to assess how effectively they can respond to a security incident in real time. Absolutely crucial role. It's used to identify fundamentally gaps in your response procedures before an actual event occurs.
Francesco, really quickly,
sure.
Use the phrase trusted security and then another word, and I got a little bit of static there. So you described the exercise as a trusted security something.
Structured security simulation.
Simulation, thank you.
Simulation. Yeah, just stop me anytime, Carl, if the audio is not clear. It's a simulation.
Everything's been clear so far besides that.
Awesome. Now, why it's critical, especially for regulated industries? We all know it. FSIs are under constant attack. This is just the 24/7, 365 inevitable thing, whether it's national state actors, ransomware groups, insider threats. Unfortunately, FSIs face constant pressure. And as I said, it's inevitable because of the nature of their business. Now, to make it worse, with a shift to cloud-native stacks, security has become very much more complex. The tech stack and cloud-native technologies are inevitably more complex. They introduce more abstraction. And also, although there are shared responsibility models in place, you very much have to manage your own cloud security posture effectively, while at the same time ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements. In particular, DORA mandates that financial institutions must demonstrate that not only they have procedures in place, but they can effectively detect, contain, and recover from cyber events. TTX plays a crucial role in this effort, effectively stress testing response plans, uncovering gaps and vulnerabilities previously unknown, and improving overall resilience before the actual attack happens. And we all know, again, don't want to buzzwords, but it will happen. It's not about if, it's about when. Super. Recap what incident response is, intelligence-driven defense, intelligence-driven response. Now we all know what a TTX is. Let's talk about what we ran last year, which I was personally involved with, and I think was absolutely amazing and pretty much a unique opportunity for a security professional like me. FINOS, in collaboration with ControlPlane, my firm, brought together senior security professionals from the largest banks, hedge funds, and trading firms, from the member base, but also we had guests from organizations not currently in FINOS. And these firms and their representatives, they took part in a 90-minute interactive session at the Open Source in Finance Forum in London. The tabletop exercise, the way we designed it, was designed to assess how well financial institutions prepare for cloud-native incident response, but by getting them to compare each other's procedures and response against a scenario we put together. And it was very interesting to see how different organizations, depending on size, depending on threat profile, they responded broadly in the same way, but with very interesting differences. It was behind closed doors, but what we did, we basically put together an extract of the key findings at the end of these 90 minutes, which we presented by the end of the day at the keynote, at the final adoption. Still somewhat challenging due to complex tech stacks, shared responsibility models, and actually evolving regulatory requirements. Secondarily, the exercise highlighted that context is everything when responding to an incident before actually taking action, before executing the steps.
Francesco, we lost you slightly.
I think you might have unfortunately been disconnected.
Oh, fair enough. Let me
You're
resume
back
real
now.
quick. Super. 2 seconds. Apologies.
Not a problem at all.
There we go. If I had a demo, the demo would have broken during live. So I was saying, thirdly, incident response teams really need to get the right balance of technical and soft skills. Sometimes some teams are overly technical, some other times the opposite, and it's about striking the right balance and also bringing at the table the right people from those teams. First, playbooks are only effective if they're tested, just documenting every step. Organizations need to focus on rehearsing real-world scenarios to ensure the actual response plans align with both technical and business needs. Because as we'll see in a moment, TTX is also very much about the business. And then conclude, regulatory alignment is essential. TTX, they always must align to a regulatory requirement or standard in place for the organization. Fantastic. Let's move on to the interesting part. How am I doing with time? Spot on. So let's now see how we plan, structure, and execute a TTX within your organization. So now, believe it or not, actually, I'm sure you do believe it. One of the biggest challenges in running a TTX is not about the exercise execution itself, it's about getting the buy-in from leadership and key stakeholders, because again, it has to be across the business. Many execs still see cyber threats as a technical problem for IT, for security teams to handle. Now, but in financial services, where the situation is better, I would say, a cyber incident is actually a business risk. And this is broadly understood. It can lead to regulatory fines, reputational damage, massive financial losses, especially targeting specific systems. On top of that, DORA needs to now effectively require financial institutions to demonstrate their ability to respond to cyber incidents. And that's where TTX really is helpful and provides concrete evidence of that readiness. So recommendation is, if you have a hard time selling a TTX internally, by framing it as a investment in resilience, not just to tick the box against a compliance line item, I think you have a good chance of getting the leadership to actually support the initiative. Now, the buy-in. A few recommendations based on us supporting our key stakeholders within, and that we're trying to effectively organize a TTX within the bank or within the institution, what recommendations we can provide. If you want the executive buy-in, 100% avoid technical jargon. And for me, it's very easy to go straight into, oh, Kubernetes, so we have to freeze the orchestration if we want to isolate the workload. They don't care, they don't need to, because really, you want to frame the conversation around business impact, regulatory compliance, and financial risk. That's a common language that everyone understands. For example, instead of saying we need to test our security response, maybe the better way is to say, how would we respond if an attack leaked sensitive client data? And that, if you see that there is interest there, or if you understood the pain point, you can also build a scenario around that. Or you can say, what happens if regulators find us for failing to act fast enough to an incident? You can as well show examples of recent financial sector breach. There are some disclosed or less disclosed, and the consequence they faced. No CEO or board wants their company to be the next cautionary tale, as far as I can tell. Now, going back to the publicly disclosed and less so breaches. FSIs, they belong to different intelligence communities. You can gain a lot of knowledge around what happened privately within FINOS. There are others out there. I'm sure all your organizations belong to at least one. If not, use publicly available information. Now, too often, and that's the major risk, the TTX only focus on security teams. That's inevitable because it's usually suggested by the security function within the organization. But in reality, I can't stress this enough. And cyber incidents impact the entire business, but we all know it. And the idea is to build a scenario wisely where everyone is involved. We'll talk about it in a moment. Recommendation, critical to involve third-party service providers, external vendors, and even regulators, if you so wish. Why? Because again, shared responsibility model. I'm sure you are large enough customers of a lot of service providers out there that provide mission critical, business critical service to you. I don't think it's unfair to ask them to participate to your, again, everyone understands their role and the responsibilities in a moment of crisis, but before that crisis happens. Now, scenario, absolutely critical. It took us a long time and many conversations with FINOS representatives from FINOS, including Greece, Neve was there as well. It took us a long time to identify the right scenario. It has to be useful and has to be relevant. So spend the necessary time to understand what right TTX scenario is for your organization. It must be realistic, relevant, and high. So for FSIs, you can choose ransomware attack on customer data, maybe a little weak. You can go for a DORA violation that leads to regulatory fines, which is maybe far more pressing than a generic attack, ransomware phishing and so on. The most important thing, again, based on the experience last year, but also running TTX in general for customers, let's not be afraid of opening the Pandora's box. It's a safe space. I know there are internal dynamics in organizations. I'll be inclined to call them politics, but I call them dynamics. But let's not be afraid, because again, it's about common goals. It's about the organization overall getting better at responding to incidents by rehearsing those playbooks. Testing the worst case scenario works really well in that sense, trying to find what really keeps the exec teams awake at night. Some in the telco space, not to give you on purpose an example in financial institutions, in the telco space, system downtime leads to an actual loss of revenue. If the systems don't work, they can't bill customers for voice and data. And targeting some specific systems can really keep the executives up at night. Let's say Be Wise, again, it's about showing how badly things can go and rehearse on how to respond in those situations. Don't test the easy, low-key situations. It won't really uncover real games. Now, also very important, the what, the structure. The TTX, they have to have a clear structure and objective. We are effectively testing technical and non-technical response, regulatory compliance, or exec decision-making under pressure. It's about defining that. Then set objectives, carefully draft the scenario, define who does what, create a timeline, something convincing and a real world, based on real world information. Something quite interesting, simulate external pressure. Can be customer demand, regulatory demand, media inquiries, and then run it to the actor. The plot for the day, it depends on the scenario. The key is to observe decision making and coordination, avoiding too many cooks in the kitchen situation. And then critical, after running the scenario, after running the exercise, executing the playbooks at the table, run a review, identifying weaknesses with a view of updating procedures, policies, and document everything. Typically, we transcribe the exercise, not record, just transcribe to then derive notes. Now, some additional guidance. TTX should be structured with a clear facilitator. It can be internal, can be external. The facilitator is the person guiding the process to ensure it stays on track. There is a very high risk of having side conversation or to diverge from the actual response process that you are rehearsing by going through the playbook. The facilitator keeps things running smoothly and on track. Define clear objectives and outcomes, such as we want to run this TTX because we want to improve decision making, we want to improve communication across different teams, or we want to be more effective when in crisis management. Just outline and document the exact outcomes of the exercise. A successful exercise also includes injects or additional crisis updates. And why we use those is to effectively increase the complexity and really push participants to think on their feet, stimulating the pressure of real-time decision making. Overall, the facilitator's job is not to make life easier, it's to really challenge teams and reveal, I call them weaknesses. I'm not talking about human weaknesses, I'm talking about process weaknesses. And it's really about highlighting those. A few real-world factors that you can use. Regulator requests immediate disclosure. A fake leak spreads misinformation online. A key system fails unexpectedly, and why, and for what root cause. And really, this forces teams to develop that sort of fast decision making under pressure, which is critical when an actual incident occurs. Just they would think and react in a real incident. Now, what success looks like. Successful TTX doesn't mean that everything went smoothly. It never does, really. In fact, the best are the ones that expose weaknesses in the processes and highlight response gaps before the real attack does, because it will. And there will be enormous pressure when that happens. Now, you can ask yourself, did teams communicate effectively? Were they able to make decisions under pressure? Did we identify gaps in our security, legal, or PR response? Most importantly, are we prepared now better than before? If the answer is yes, even if it's a tiny small improvement, TTX was a success. Now, after you spend these 90 minutes, 120 minutes behind closed doors in a room with all these important people, don't let the insights fade away. Conduct a thorough debrief with all the involved stakeholders. Review compassionately the performance of each team, what went well, where there is room for improvement. And I suggest using this feedback to actually update your resilience and response plans. Again, the idea is to have an improvement in that space. TTX is not a one-off. Make TTX a continuous process by planning the next one, I would say as soon as possible after one is done. In this way, you build on resilience in a sort of iterative way. And again, small improvements each time, of course, changing scenarios or wisely drafting scenarios that may unveil the same weaknesses. And then you see if the gaps are filled. Now, after the session, document findings. I often transcribe everything during the session and share those findings with executives in a certain way, maybe highlighting the business value there, as well as with the technical teams. And with them, you also update the incident response plan and eventually regulatory procedures. And as I said, then don't miss the opportunity to then schedule the next TTX. I'd like to pause here for a moment if there are questions, Karen.
I'm a little annoyed with your presentation because every time I'm taking down a question in my own notes, you've on the next slide you answer it. Because I was going to ask questions about how to get buy-in and how to engage with the wider FINOS community, and then boom, next slide you've already prepared and answered it. One question I had from the beginning when you showed the attack framework. Now I've heard MITRE ATT&CK come up a lot because I sit on a lot of common cloud controls, and in the AI governance framework, these are things that we hear a lot about. Do you find that most of the partners in highly regulated industries are familiar, at least with MITRE and NIST and the MITRE ATT&CK frameworks, whether or not they've have them successfully if the playbooks implemented, or is this something that is still like potentially unknown to some people?
First of all, great question. And I can tell that based on my experience, MITRE ATT&CK is widely known, recognized as an excellent standard by both technical teams and senior exec teams alike. So it's an excellent common language.
And do you find it as useful for US-based as well as non-US based firms and teams?
Yes. I can't comment on mainland Europe, but certainly Five Eyes countries, 100%. In Germany, it's used quite a lot. We had experience there. So in general, yes.
And I'll say I particularly took down in my notebook your comment on you mentioning Five Eyes here, the intersection between financial services and intelligence, whether the places that financial services can go for the information is their own, regardless of kind of what it is, private intelligence connections that might be having, whether they can go to each other through someone like FINOS and talk to each other in order to get information sources, or otherwise go to public data sources. I'd be curious about the role that you could see, and maybe it's that FINOS could maybe play a better role in sharing these kind of peer-to-peer information sources around information gathering, and whether there's something like we can do as playbooks in the public or at a more cross-organizational level in order to do that kind of information sharing more effectively.
I don't see why not. In FINOS, we have initiatives like the CFI, Compliance Financial Infrastructure. It's about defining what good looks like in terms of infrastructure patterns. If the same wants to be done for response playbooks, for example, I don't see why not. What I would do is start from an MVP, start with something small, and see if again that can be as a a common denominator across FSI members, and it's useful, the response. In fact, it's interesting you brought it up because we talked about it privately during the TTX in London last year, when I talked about the things in common as well as the little differences that made it really interesting between the response approach of different FSIs. So definitely room to understand it, to come up with something that looks like an MVP, but generic enough that can be tailored to individual organization needs, let's say.
And I'll say from my own perspective, I didn't come up. My background is more in API integrations and not incident response. So I think about threats and controls, but I deal with them hopefully months before they're in production, as opposed to actually dealing with production incidences. So it's been really interesting for me working on the AI readiness governance framework that is speaking explicitly in the terminology of threats, risks, and controls, and how you build these processes around it. A lot of it was really new to me and coming and learning to speak this language. But what's been really cool is seeing how repeatable this becomes over and over again. So we built this governance framework on the AI readiness side, but then in our own DevOps automation SIG, we were talking about software development lifecycle management and whether in order to speak with vendors in a common language, whether we need a similar governance framework for building these processes. And all the same problems that I was hearing our DevOps automation team talk about, people were talking for 15 minutes and I went, I literally heard all of these in our governance framework for AI earlier this week. And there's such a kind of common language here for this kind of repeatability. And so that's just something that it's not so much of a question, but it's been a very exciting commonality across the groups. And just from my own notes, it's just something that I've heard from ControlPlane. ControlPlane's been very helpful in explaining driving these conversations, and a lot of what I've learned has been from language that your team and several others have been bringing to many of our calls. So it's also a bit of a plug for people on this call to join the AI readiness SIG calls, to join our governance frameworks calls, to join our common cloud controls calls, and join our DevOps automations calls, because we're not going to do the tabletop exercise necessarily in those calls. But a lot of the things that were talked about today, you can also hear there in practice.
Super. Speaking of common language, without any sales pitch here, but because we are a consultancy, we can see that we have that sort of breadth of experience working with different organizations, but working on the same pain point and solving the same challenges, just in different ways.
Yeah, and that was the exciting thing that came up in our DevOps automation call recently. Was there was a discussion around, do we need to build explicit reference implementations for each of these causes? And it was more about, and where we got to was realizing, and there's a term that Colin Ebenhardt says, is it's about outcomes, not about necessarily processes. And so being able to build a common language that leads to the outcomes that we need is where this common language becomes really useful for our member organization.
Yep, I agree 100%. So let's see what's up in 2025. And now, if you're interested in this page, you can get involved. So,
and a reminder to everyone listening, please feel free to interact with the Q&A box. We're getting towards our dedicated time, so please get those questions in.
We will have more tabletop exercises this year, given the huge success of the one in London, in particular, because there will be one in June at the Open Sourcing Finance Forum in London, as well as in New York after summer. Why attend? And this is my FINOS speech. Improve cloud-native security readiness for yourself, but also for your organization. Get really experience in real-world financial sector threats, but as I said, safe environment, behind closed doors. No one is. It's a real-world simulation, but done in a very friendly way and a very constructive way. It's not about judging how well your organization is doing in incident response. And then
also my understanding is that it's also under Chatham House rule, correct?
Indeed, yeah. Again, safe environment. The key, what really stakeholders loved last year was sharing ideas and sharing points of view as part of the same response, but how, again, the organizations respond slightly differently for the same within the same scenario. So again, it's about learning best practices or those tips and tricks from security leaders across the industry. Because again, we had an audience, don't want to call it an audience. We had a core team for the TTX, second to none. I was honored to be in the same room with these people, and I learned so much. How to register? There will be, I believe, the registration should be open soon, but I'll confirm with Greece. Apologies. Send your security or risk or compliance team people to participate.
And I'll just say that I wasn't able to attend the tabletop exercise last year. I was stuck at the AI booth for the whole conference. But all I heard for the next several days from FINOS staff, from membership, from everyone was how good the tabletop exercise was. So cannot recommend to people enough that it's very validated how good this event is, and you should definitely make sure to check it out.
Spoiler alert. This year, the scenario will involve AI. Just brace for impact. Super. As we wrap up today's session, just want to leave you with a few key takeaways. First of all, remember, TTX is just one part of a much larger and broader and org-wide operational resilience strategy that you must have in place. It's an essential tool, by all means. I hope this came across clearly. But it must be part of an ongoing cycle of improvement. It's a mean to an end. It's about improving cybersecurity posture for the org. Secondarily, resilience is not built in a single session. Some organizations, they run one every 6 months. And every time they uncover more interesting findings and keep fine-tuning those playbooks. Regular exercises combined with lessons learned from the previous ones and actually real-world incidents will keep creating a very strong baseline, response baseline for the organization. Now, unfortunately, compliance with regulations like DORA, it cannot be just a tick-the-box exercise. It's really about ensuring the org you work for can withstand and recover from real cyber threats. And the goal, again, not just to meet the requirement, it's really to strengthen the ability to operate securely and efficiently, because again, time is of essence, under pressure, which is again the differentiator between a TTX behind closed doors and a real world event. Finally, financial sector remains prime target for cyber threats, critical national infrastructure everywhere. The best way to stay ahead of, is proactive preparation. As I said, reactive doesn't cut it anymore. It's about my recommendation: take action, start writing your own internal TTXs, although many FSIs do already. Document findings, continuously refine the response strategy. To conclude, TTX, tabletop exercise, not only a compliance tool, it can't be. It's a building block and a critical building block of any resilient organization. Now, conduct it regularly, build interesting scenarios, and by continuing doing so, again, strengthen your institution ability to respond to crisis, which is fundamentally the objective. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions.
So far, our attendees are being a little quiet today. Excuse me. And anyone? Bueller? I'll say this has been one of our most detailed presentations that we've had in this webinar series so far. As I said before, every question that I had, I started writing in my notebook. You answered literally on the next slide. So
it's actually a technique to avoid awkward questions. And in any case, Carl, you got my email address. If anyone reaches out, feel free to redirect them to me.
And so we've got a question from here. We used to run mandated recovery exercises across departments. Could this be considered a mini one of these, a mini one of the tabletop exercises?
I think so. Availability is one of the three pillars of security, and recovering from a fault, which is not necessarily coming from a threat actor, is definitely classified as, or can be definitely classified as a tabletop exercise. There was a very interesting article I read recently about, it was like fairly philosophical on security incidents, and where intention is only one side of the, sometimes you just have a random events causing outages, and they have to be tested as well. Not only when someone tries to breach the organization or steal your data. So in a nutshell, yes. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and then the kind of the follow-up question was this in the context of disaster recovery is making sure that this can be another way to ensure that they get completed in a regular cadence. So like, how do you make sure that you're building these cadences into your processes? And I'll say one of the things that I really liked in your notes was in your list of what includes a tabletop exercise is talking about, okay, you've got these lessons learned. How do you build these lessons learned back into processes? Because that's otherwise you're just learning lessons in a vacuum, bringing those back into regular cadence so that they actually impact process.
Yeah. And again, once a gap is identified and you try to fill that gap with updating your response procedure, then the idea is that the next TTX you come up with a scenario which looks completely different, involving different systems, but really assessing if that gap was filled or not, which is something, in fact, we are going to do this year, although the scenario will be very different. We'll talk about, I don't want to spoil it or Greece will get upset, but it will involve AI systems. And some of the attack steps in the attack chain we use will be carefully crafted to try to unveil if the response gaps were filled or not.
And I'll say and I don't know the topic of the exercise, so I can't. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling anything here. But in your note here about DORA compliance isn't about checking boxes. One thing we've really dealt with is with the EU AI Act is there's a lot of things in that regulatory framework that are human rights. How do you check a box on whether an AI system does human rights? So we've had to set up additional exploratory things around responsible AI to come up with a framework that is not going to be checking boxes. And it's going to require organizational muscle building in order to learn how to even answer these questions. So I particularly like this note about checking boxes because it's going to be very similar in a lot of regulatory compliance. And Grizz says he's not angry. So,
awesome. I did not reveal enough too much then.
I think we're appropriately teasering people to whet their appetites. Well, with that, we're at 2 minutes from the hour. Any last questions? Okay, we've got a note in the webinar chat. Thanks everyone who joined. Here's our link for our next Hedera will be our next member webinar. As a reminder to people on the call, this is a member benefit. If you'd like to join our next series in our open source in finance webinar series, please contact Grizz, Neve, the marketing team to get on the queue. With that, a big FINOS thank you, round of applause, community applause to Francesco.
Thank you so much.
This was an absolutely phenomenal webinar. I learned myself so much, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. And I can't wait until the next tabletop exercise.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a great day, you all.
All right, you as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.